que constantemente se preguntan, ¿nos están vigilando? ¿Quiénes tienen nuestra información? ¿Quién está luchando con nuestro miedo? A nivel estatal no tenemos una ley sólida que realmente nos proteja de la vigilancia constante de corporaciones que compilan, compran y venden nuestros datos. No hay una barrera clara que diga hasta aquí. No pueden usar el temor de nuestra comunidad como modelo de negocio. No se puede. Hace más de 10 años logramos algo histórico en nuestro estado. Después de años de organización, testimonios y valentía, conseguimos que se aprobara la ley que permitió a los inmigrantes obtener licencias de conducir en Connecticut. No fue un regalo, fue una conquista que se hizo. Fue el resultado de la comunidad que dijeron, queremos hacer las cosas bien, queremos cumplir con la ley, queremos construir de manera segura. Obtener una licencia significa poder llevar a nuestros hijos a las escuelas sin miedo, poder ir al trabajo, pagar impuestos, cumplir con las reglas de este país, que también es nuestro hogar. Fue un acto de confianza. Confiamos en el sistema, confiamos en que registrarnos, dar nuestros datos, cumplir con requisitos estrictos, era un paso hacia la inclusión y la estabilidad. Pero hoy enfrentamos una realidad preocupante. No existe a nivel estatal una ley robusta que nos proteja de la vigilancia constante, corporaciones que compilan, almacenan y monetizan nuestros datos, empresas que construyen perfiles digitales que rastrean movimientos, que analizan patrones y que pueden convertirse nuestra información en mercancía. Y lo más doloroso es que el apoyo que hicimos para adaptarnos a las leyes, para cumplir, para integrarnos, ahora puede convertirse en una herramienta que nos pone en la mira. No es justo que quienes actuaron de buena fe ahora viven con un gran temor de que sus datos puedan ser utilizados, compartidos o vendidos sin consentimientos claros y reales. La vigilancia corporativa no es algo abstracto, tiene efectos reales, genera ansiedad, genera autocensura, hace que la gente dude antes de registrarse para servicios de salud, para programas estatales, para cualquier cosa que requiere información personal. Quiero agradecer por la oportunidad que me dieron y también por la presencia de todos ustedes hoy aquí y por escucharme, y muchas gracias.
Thank you so much to Yuri for sharing her story and how the immigrant community is feeling at this moment. Now we'll hear from Amalia, an organizer with ACLU 1199 New England.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amalia Mayorga. I am a union organizer with SCIU. We represent healthcare workers across Rhode Island and Connecticut, and I organize public sector workers in the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. I'm here today not only as an organizer, but as a Connecticut resident and as a proud daughter of Latino immigrants. I'm here to speak from the perspective of organizers and activists who see a growing and dangerous threat to our ability to organize as the rise of AI surveillance technology is deployed in our workspaces and our communities. Over the last several years, as many people probably already have been feeling, seeing, and know, AI surveillance technology has rapidly evolved. What started as simple introductions into our workspaces by employers, such as time tracking software, right, productivity tracking software, has transformed into sophisticated systems, otherwise known as bossware, that track, monitor productivity rates, scan our communications, analyze feelings, and collect massive amounts of behavioral data. In fact, between March 2020 and June 2024, demand for employee surveillance software grew by 54% in the United States. Employers are not just supervising work anymore, they are building data profile of workers, and that data is being used for far more than productivity. Nowhere has this been more evident than in the case of Amazon, where a Northwestern University peer-reviewed academic study published in 2025 documented how advanced algorithms and digital surveillance tools were weaponized during a union campaign in Bessemer, Alabama fulfillment center. The study found that in this union campaign, I believe it was 2021, that Amazon used the same algorithmic systems designed to manage work tasks to also monitor workers' behaviors, send anti-union messages through workplace apps that employees have to use for scheduling their pay and putting in their time, and even use these same systems to gauge sentiments and to discourage support for unionization. Workers reported that these systems were programmed to deliver targeted content that they couldn't ignore, pressuring them before and during the union vote. This act by Amazon was not just a passive oversight, it was a coercive form of digital union busting. And digital union busting is something that we are going to be seeing in our coming future, right? The study also revealed tactics like algorithmic slack cutting, where automated systems were used to temporarily ease the quotas of the like stock items that workers had to fulfill during the union drive to create a false sense of improved conditions, only to hike those quotas back up after the union drive was over. Amazon monitored worker social media groups, including dozens of private Facebook pages and Reddit forums, with the explicit aim of capturing posts about grievances, protests, and organizing. Some employees even reported being disciplined or being terminated for online posts about their working conditions. What's important to remember is that these aren't isolated events. Employers are increasingly using AI systems to profile and track union sympathizers, tying data about workers' movements, workers' decisions, and digital interactions to broader patterns associated with organizing and labor activism. A leaked memo by the company showed that Amazon has in fact built an internal AI platform to map union activity and grant money flows across its sites across the world, effectively turning worker data into intelligence on organizing efforts. As this threat extends beyond individual employers, companies like Palantir Technologies are building powerful data integration platforms that allow governments and corporations to aggregate and analyze massive data sets linking behavioral, employment, and surveillance data into centralized intelligence systems. Flock Safety, which we will be talking about today, installs automated license plate readers across communities, collecting vehicle movement data that can be stored and shared. When workplace data, public surveillance data, and predictive analytics converge, organizers and marginalized communities become easier to track, profile, and target. And here's the most alarming part. There are virtually no comprehensive regulations governing how this data is collected, how long it's stored, who it's shared with, or how it can be used. There are no clear guardrails preventing employers from using AI to identify union sympathizers, no prohibitions on aggregating worker data with external surveillance data like license plate readers, and no strong statewide protections ensuring workers know what algorithms are deciding about their livelihoods. From an organizer's perspective, constant surveillance has a chilling effect. When workers believe that their conversations, their movements, or their digital communications can be tracked, workers begin to self-censor. They hesitate to speak up. They pull back from building collective power. And marginalized communities, immigrants, workers of color, public sector employees bear the brunt of this monitoring. However, Connecticut has a choice. We can allow AI surveillance to quietly embed itself into our workplaces and public agencies, or we can act now. We are a union state, and that is how we plan to stay. And workers, organizers, and marginalized communities from around our state should never have to fear that an algorithm is watching them exercise their fundamental rights. I'm here to say that we must protect worker data, we must protect organizing, we must protect democracy, and we must protect our immigrants, brothers and sisters. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both Yuri and Amalia for sharing their experiences and perspective on today's webinar. Now I want to go ahead and pass it over to Gus and Chelsea, who are going to share with us more information about the automated license plate readers.
Thank you, Amy. We can go to the next slide. And I'll start talking about automatic license plate readers, ALPRs, which for folks on the call who are not familiar, I'm going to go over a little bit about the basics of what ALPRs are, sort of a crash course in this new technology. So ALPRs are high-speed camera-based surveillance systems that automatically snap photos and record the time, date, and GPS location of every passing vehicle. You can find ALPRs on poles like this one up the street from me in the town that I live in Farmington. You can find them on road signs and bridges and mounted on police cars too, so they're mobile. One of the most basic ways ALPRs are used are at tolling locations like an I-90 in Massachusetts or I-95 in New York. And in addition to recording the license plate of a vehicle, ALPR technology has developed so that it can identify the make, model, color, and details of a vehicle, like if there's a car that has a dent or a scratch on it, and even if there's a bumper sticker on the car. Even though ALPR companies may state that they don't read the bumper sticker, they just recognize that a vehicle has a bumper sticker on it. The data from ALPRs are stored and retained in cloud-based servers and sometimes pooled into regional sharing systems. As a result, enormous databases of people's location information is rapidly growing, and from these ever-growing databases, the everyday movements of a person can be reconstructed, as well as identifying who visits a particular location at a particular time, like going to church or going to see a healthcare provider, and how often a person might go there. Now, ALPRs are acronyms. It is not a brand or an organization, but there are many private companies that use and sell this technology for their businesses. Flock Safety, like was just mentioned, is probably the most widely known, but there's also Vigilant Solutions, Recourse Systems, Leonardo DRS. Beginning last November, the ACLU of Connecticut sent over 100, I think 104 public records requests to police departments across the state to obtain information about the uses of ALPR. So far, we've confirmed that 53 state police departments in Connecticut use ALPR systems, and 45 of them use Flock Safety. We can go to the next slide. I want to make a distinction between ALPRs and other kinds of traffic cameras people might be familiar with in Connecticut, particularly red light cameras and speed cameras, also called speed safety cameras or automated traffic enforcement safety devices. Red light cameras are located at intersections with traffic lights and will take a picture of a vehicle when a vehicle passes a signal after the light has turned red. Speed cameras similarly, we'll take pictures of vehicles in school zones and pedestrian safety zones when a vehicle exceeds 10 miles per hour over the posted speed limit. The stated goals of those cameras are to reduce crashes, injuries, and fatalities by using photos from cameras to monitor and enforce red light running and speed limits. At the ACLU of Connecticut, we have long had concerns about these kinds of cameras and do not believe that increasing surveillance is a real solution to creating safer streets and driving, in addition to the issue of placing these cameras in communities where people of color are disproportionately impacted. However, red light and speed safety cameras are focused on traffic violations, and municipalities are required to go through an application process with the Connecticut Department of Transportation that includes creating an ordinance, holding a public hearing before those towns can install ALPRs. We've made recommendations that data collected by those cameras not be shared and be deleted after a set amount of time. And these kinds of automated traffic safety enforcement devices are highly regulated in Connecticut. ALPRs, however, do not have to go through that application process. And in towns where they have been installed, residents may not even realize they exist because there was not notification or public hearing. ALPRs are not focused on traffic violations in the way that red light and speed cameras are. These cameras are just taking pictures of every single vehicle that passes by them and recording the time and location that the vehicle does drive by. Go to the next slide. So while ALPRs have always presented a significant risk to privacy and civil rights, such as opening the door to retroactive surveillance of innocent people without a warrant, or when they are deployed against communities of color as revenue generators, the second Trump administration's targeting of immigrants and the awareness that ICE is using ALPR data for Trump's anti-immigration and mass deportation efforts, that has intensified concerns about the use of ALPR technology. We've learned that police departments in states like Texas and Florida and Georgia have accessed our data thousands of times. Thank you to the Institute of Municipal and Regional Policy for doing some of this research. And they use terms like ICE and ICE Assist. There was also a case late last year where a Texas Sheriff Department used ALPR data to search for a woman who was seeking an abortion. When out-of-state police agencies access our data here in Connecticut, particularly when they are looking to criminalize the lawful activity of people in Connecticut, that is violating, if not the letter of the law, then the spirit of our state's Trust Act and SHIELD laws. And then adding to that, there have been a number of troubling reports of data being hacked, data being shared intentionally or unintentionally in ways that people were not aware of, and an overall widespread mistrust of how our information is being collected, being shared, and being used. There has been rising opposition to ALPRs across the country, and you can easily find cities and towns that have been turning off their ALPRs. Here in Connecticut, just 2 weeks ago, the town of Windsor voted to turn off their 16 ALPR cameras after residents spent months organizing against the cameras in public meetings. And this was years after the ALPRs had been first installed without any public hearings or policy regulating them. But like I said earlier, over half of Connecticut towns are using ALPRs. So what we need right now is statewide regulations to put guardrails around how ALPRs are being used. So I'm going to turn this over to Chelsea Infinity Gonzalez to discuss what we're working on right now in the legislature.
Thanks so much, Gus. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Chelsea Infinity. I use she, they pronouns. Policy Director at the ACLU of Connecticut. So now that we've level set a little bit and have a sort of better understanding of what ALPRs are and the impact that they have on our communities, I want to talk a little bit about what Connecticut can actually do about ALPRs. So the Connecticut General Assembly has the power essentially to pass a statewide law. As we've heard, there is no existing statewide framework governing ALPR usage. And so we have the power to essentially do that. Pass a bill that sets clear roles for how ALPRs are used. Right now, policies can vary from town to town, and a lot of departments don't even really have a strong framework in place. And that's if they have one at all. And so a strong statewide law would really create consistency, consistent protections for Connecticut residents across the board. What we're listing here isn't necessarily everything that a good bill should include, but rather really the bare minimum for a strong ALPR bill. And I want to go over some of these pieces a little bit more in detail. The first being any strong ALPR bill really truly needs to have strong limits on data sharing, strong data sharing prohibitions. And in practice, that would mean that police departments or agencies that use ALPRs couldn't just freely share that data with out-of-state agencies or with federal entities without very clear rules. Because once that data is shared, what happens is it becomes much, much harder to control how it's being used or misused, which, to Gus's point, we know that that is already happening. It also shouldn't be shared with any entity that is using it or planning to use it for the purposes of immigration investigation or enforcement, or to criminalize anyone who has sought, received, or even provided reproductive or gender-affirming healthcare, which are protected healthcare activities and all legal within the state of Connecticut. The second piece is that any strong ALPR bill really has to include a very short, a very tight retention period. And that essentially is how long that data is stored in the system. ALPR systems collect data, as Gus named, on thousands of drivers every single day, most of whom are not even suspected of any wrongdoing. And that is, another huge reason why this technology should be limited to very clearly defined and specific circumstances. It should not function as a long-term database of every single person's movements. The longer that data is stored in the system, the easier it becomes to map someone's routines and their associations. A shorter retention period or a short retention period is really critical because, again, the longer that data is stored, it becomes easier to piece together a person's movements, or rather their patterns. So, for example, if you have a 2-week retention period and you have a routine and you're at the same place every Tuesday and Thursday, the longer that data is stored, the easier it is to piece that together, to determine where someone lives, where they work, where they worship, or who they visit regularly even, right? We've proposed a 7-day retention limit to the Judiciary Committee. And for context, New Hampshire, which is another New England state, has had a 3-minute, the shortest retention period, a 3-minute retention period since 2007. And it has been working successfully for them for this long. And just last year, Virginia passed a bipartisan ALPR law with a 21-day retention period. So we feel that 7 days is a realistic middle ground that would significantly reduce the risk of long-term tracking of people's movements and being able to put those patterns together. The third piece is, any strong ALPR bill should also prohibit collecting data at or near sensitive locations. And that could look like facilities that primarily provide reproductive or gender-affirming healthcare. It could also look like nonprofits that primarily serve immigrant families and support immigrant communities. And the why is because surveillance near these spaces can discourage, to the stories that we've heard, what Amy has shared, what Gus has shared, really discourages people from seeking these essential services. No one should have to worry about, am I going to be tracked when I'm visiting my doctor? If I, want to volunteer after school at my local nonprofit, that supports immigrant families like mine, right? I shouldn't have to fear that, again, my movements are going to be tracked and entered into this large government database. The fourth piece is that, any strong ALPR bill also has to have an enforcement mechanism. We have a tendency to, pass bills that sound great and look great on paper, but also in practice aren't necessarily as meaningful because there is no way to hold violators of whatever bill accountable. What happens when a law enforcement agency, doesn't follow what's outlined in an ALPR bill? And so if a Connecticut agency violates the law, there has to be a meaningful way for people to go to court and to seek accountability. Without enforcement, it really just is a right on paper, and it's more performative than we want it to be. And we know, you can have the best intentions, but that sometimes doesn't translate into the impact, the real life impact on people and communities. And then lastly, a strong ALPR bill really should include some robust reporting requirements as well and independent oversight. And that means that agencies using ALPRs would have to regularly report how often the system is used, how long that data is retained, who it's shared with, who it's used against, what's that person's race, what's that person's gender, and for what purposes. And it's not an exhaustive list either, but essentially you want to be able to figure out, how is this actually working? And so that transparency is really important because it allows lawmakers and the public to evaluate whether this law is actually working as intended, right? And whether stronger protections are needed. It gives us an evidence base to come back in the event that things aren't working as we planned, and to be able to advocate for some more restrictions, or maybe this isn't really operational and we need to fix this part of the bill. It gives us a way to actually advocate for those changes. And importantly, there also should be independent review, right? Law enforcement agencies should not be the sole judges of whether they are complying with the rules. Oversight really does need to come from outside of the agency to ensure that there is actual accountability, and that we are also really building on public trust as well. The other piece is just that, again, this is not the entire wish list, but some foundational safeguards that we believe will make an ALPR bill really meaningful in practice. The main goal is just to ensure that if this technology is being used, it should be used in a way that protects people's privacy, protects people's civil rights, and also public trust, right? Because that's also a really, really big factor. Really, it's really important. And so we can go to the next slide. As far as where things stand in the legislative process now, and now generally, but also now that we have a little bit more of an understanding of what feels like the bare minimum, what feels like the most important, not to minimize other pieces, but some of the really core principles that we need in a strong ALPR bill. The legislative session runs from February 4th through May 6th. So we're working with a relatively short window. Legislators do realize, though, that they need to take action to regulate ALPRs, and they have informed us that they are committed to passing a bill this session. There's a lot of momentum, a lot of buzz around ALPRs. And again, really glad that we were able to hear from some directly impacted people, because it really is a testament to why this is so important and needed. And so there was an ALPR bill that was raised in the Judiciary Committee on February 18th, and that signals to us that lawmakers are taking us seriously and they are prepared to move on this issue. The bill text hasn't yet been formally introduced. We expect that it'll be released soon, possibly this week, possibly filed this week and then public. And once that language is introduced, there will likely be a public hearing shortly after. As soon as we see the bill text and we know what it actually includes and entails, we will be sending out a rapid response analysis, breaking down what it includes, where it's strong, where it could be stronger, where there may be some other improvements needed or some alignment needed. And we'll also share very clear talking points so that folks can reach out to your state representatives, to your state senators, in an informed way and to ask them to co-sponsor this bill. And also, right, if there are improvements that we need to make to help us advocate for those changes. And once we know when the public hearing will be, once it's scheduled, we'll circulate a testimony toolkit or a testimony guide that will make it easy for folks to submit written testimony or to testify in person or virtually, whatever you feel comfortable with. The most important thing to note is that it is really a key moment, which is something that some of our other speakers have named. The structure of this bill is something that will certainly be shared early, or shaped, excuse me, early. And public input, your voice can really make a difference. It can really ensure that the minimum safeguards that we discussed are kept part of this bill. Next slide, please. And then also wanted to name, you don't have to be an expert to understand that location tracking deserves very clear rules. Like, I am by no means a data expert or anything remotely like, absolutely not. I'm not, no. But I do know, right, that when powerful technology expands without guardrails, it's our job as a community to make sure that there are guardrails put in place, right? This should not be used for things like immigration enforcement. This should not be used to criminalize people who seek or provide or receive gender-affirming healthcare or reproductive healthcare, or just to track people, period, right? People who are protesting and engaging in their constitutionally protected First Amendment, right, which we also have evidence that that's happened, right? That's what people are using these systems for, or rather weaponizing these systems for. So this is definitely a really powerful moment. We have an opportunity to shape this bill, and things are moving rapidly, and we are going to match that pace. And we are going to, in addition to sharing out these slides and to sharing, this is a slide that has some resources just to help aid folks in talking a little bit more about ALPRs. But we definitely have a chance to move something really powerful this session. And so I will pass it back over to Amy and open it up for some questions, but wanted to level set and make sure that folks understood more or less what we are advocating for in terms of core principles or core protections in this bill. And hopefully we will have a really strong bill to work from soon.
Thank you so much, Chelsea and Gus, for this presentation. We are going to open it up to Q&A. So thank you to all of you that added a question when you registered or dropped the question throughout the webinar. So let's see what we have here. So the first question we see here are, there are many indivisible groups across Connecticut. How can we help in a campaign to pass state regulations?
I'll jump into that real quick. I mean, I love that question. Like I was saying earlier, so we know that these cameras are located in about half Connecticut towns across the state right now. We don't know exactly what they all are, though, but for folks who are reaching out to their legislators, their state senators or state representatives, asking them, as Chelsea Infinity was just saying, to become co-sponsors of the bill once we have the actual language on it. Asking representatives and senators to become co-sponsors is a really good way within the caucus to show other elected officials that there is growing support for a bill. So legislators will often look at a bill and they can scroll down to the bottom and they can see how many of their colleagues have decided to co-sponsor a bill. And that's an excellent way of generating conversation within the caucus as well as building momentum and support for a bill. So reaching out to your elected officials and asking them to please sponsor the bill when we have the bill number, sharing the bill number with them. If you end up testifying or submitting written testimony during the public hearing, also sending that testimony to your elected officials is also a good way because they may not sit on the Judiciary Committee where this bill is being heard. I apologize if I'm talking quick. But if your elected official doesn't sit in the Judiciary Committee, they still will be voting on this bill at some point. So sending your testimony to them, as well as the request to become a co-sponsor of the bill, would be a great way to support it.
Thank you, Gus. Next question. I saw that the current version of the Connecticut legislators' bill includes a FOIA exemption for ALPR data. How should we balance individual privacy concerns with the need for transparency?
I think that's a great question. I would name that it is tricky, right? Ultimately, though, the FOIA exemption, if there were to be a FOIA exemption included in the bill that the Judiciary Committee raised, I think what would be important to name is, yes, we do, there are some, it is important to have that be included and to redact folks' information and not have that be widely shared, because also that would be counter to the purpose of the statute in and of itself. And so as long as information is redacted and we're not necessarily continuing to perpetuate this data sharing network without people's consent, I think the key is also ensuring that with regard to a FOIA exemption, there's certain information that can't be exempted, and that would look like, what essentially the reasons that we named that this technology is being used. So that would look like, what it's being used for, how many cameras are up in a person's neighborhood, where the cameras are located, what those cameras are used for. Those kinds of things I think are important to be mindful when talking about FOIA exemptions. And I think that is a way to balance that privacy, right? Like, yes, we recognize that they may include language like that, but also there should be a level of transparency in how these systems are being used, while not sharing very specific information like license plate reader information of citizens of the state of Connecticut, but being mindful about that.
Great. Next question. For what purposes do towns buy, install, and maintain these ALPRs? People want to know what value towns and law enforcement agencies see in ALPRs, especially with shorter retention periods like New Hampshire.
I'll try to answer that quickly and I apologize for answering a question with another question. I think something else to consider, though, is the risk to our civil liberties by this mass surveillance of people who are presumed innocent, people who have not committed any traffic violations and are simply living their normal lives, driving to work, driving to school, driving to wherever a person might drive to, and they're being surveilled and they're being tracked and their movement patterns are being recorded. And that information, that personal data, is being accessible by not just the people that are in Connecticut, but the agencies in Connecticut, by police agencies outside of Connecticut. And who else knows where that information goes? Again, the companies that own these cameras are using them for their business models. But to play devil's advocate a bit, I believe there are some benefits to these cameras. Police talk about how they've, been able to do investigations using these cameras. But again, the balance is with the civil liberties that people have, and trying to make sure that we are maintaining that very tight retention period of 7 days. So this information that's being recorded about people is not kept for, an unending amount of time. Maintaining that very short retention period of 7 days is critical.
Thank you, Gus. The next question is, I saw this bill circulated in some spaces. Is this not the current proposal with a hearing this week? I'm new to tracking Connecticut legislative session. So the link includes SB4.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So this is not the bill that we are referring to. This is actually a different bill that is in the General Law Committee. And we have been working with the Judiciary Committee, the Judiciary co-chairs specifically, to try to introduce, a bill that has some of those core protections that we named. This is a larger consumer privacy, data privacy bill that has some ALPR language tucked into it. And I think part of the motivation behind that is because, as I said before, there's a lot of momentum around ALPRs right now and a lot of interest from legislators because we have been so vocal on this issue. Everyone, right, wants to introduce something right now. Everyone wants to move something right now. And I think it's just a testament to our power. We are not necessarily opposed to the language that has been included. We don't love it, right? It's a very, very sort of bare framework, and we've been working on a much more comprehensive framework that would govern way more, right, includes way more specific language with regard to how this should and shouldn't be used. A very short retention period. There isn't really a retention period included in this. We love the intent in terms of it not being used for immigration enforcement or investigation or, criminalizing repro or gender affirming healthcare. At the same time, we think that it certainly can go a lot further. And in terms of, whether or not we might be able to offer some talking points for folks who want to, share some thoughts on that language, which I know is up for hearing on Wednesday. That's also something we are, very happy to do. We ourselves are submitting some language around, of course, the intent, which is appreciated, but also just wanting to make sure that we are doing something that is way more comprehensive considering the state has nothing at all. And it feels a little bit there. So it is different. It's not necessarily bad, but again, we have been working on something way more comprehensive and are hopeful that judiciary will be receptive and will introduce some stronger language this week.
Thank you, Chelsea. Next question. How can we find out which towns are using ALPRs?
So we've FOIA'd all of the police departments in the state as well as the state police beginning in November. And we are gradually getting responses back to those FOIA requests. I think, like I mentioned earlier, I think we're a little over 50 police departments have confirmed that they do use ALPRs using different companies. Some police departments have published on their town websites that they do use ALPRs. That you can actually go in and see some of the information that they're being tracked. You can literally see the search terminology that they use and who that information is being shared with. And then other police departments don't. It's just sort of a black box. So I think if you're interested, you can file a public records request in your town. That process may look different based on where you live, but I think that's an excellent first step right now because we are learning that towns are contracting with these ALPR companies without there being public hearings, without there being a lot of transparency in terms of where they're being installed around towns. And I think it's really important just from a transparency perspective for residents to understand where these cameras are being installed in the towns that they live in.
I would add too that there is a, which we will make sure is included in the resources slide for folks when we share out these slides. But there also is a really great tool that isn't final. It's always being updated in real time based on what folks like us are reporting that we're seeing in our neighborhoods. But there's also this website, dflock.org. As you can imagine, it is they are not a fan of flock safety. nor are we. And they do have a map of Connecticut, and you are able to go in and sort of play around with it. And it does show you what people have logged in terms of the may not be all of them, but it definitely gives you an idea of active ALPR cameras in Connecticut. And I will tell you that there are a significant number, and a lot of them are concentrated in cities like New Haven and places like New Hartford, larger urban areas that they would designate, right? So that is something that we can also, as folks are learning more about this system and becoming more familiar with where cameras are, or questioning whether or not there are cameras, in your neighborhood. That's one tool that's been helpful to gauge where folks have reported seeing those cameras. And then also, of course, communicating as well with, with your town council or your law enforcement department. I know Gus named that we submitted our own FOIA request, and that's something that's been a really powerful tool for community members as well. And we're always able to provide TA, technical assistance, if folks want to submit their own FOIA requests at some point.
Okay, great. I just want to be conscious of the time. So I think we only have time for just one question. And again, no worries if we weren't able to get to your question today. We're going to send up a follow-up email with responses to your questions and a frequently asked question sheet. So real quickly, if we're fortunate enough to have a bill passed, what would be the effective date? We may not want to approach our town police department to take more immediate action if the bill wouldn't be effective for months. And would it be useful for us to contact our police chiefs and police departments to ask how ALPRs are used in our town city?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think that's always helpful. I think the more that they hear from you, the more that this is top of mind for them. And I think that, ideally, this is something that would immediately go into effect. And of course, there would be some pieces that would have to be operationalized, or would take a second to be operationalized. But I think law enforcement agencies, in and of themselves, right? Some of them have named that they're supportive of this effort. It's not all, right? But there definitely has been, we've been hearing from these agencies, and it seems like folks are eager to move quickly. In terms of what that timeline would actually look like, that's something we're still determining based on, whatever it is that whatever language ends up actually being filed. And so it's kind of TBD. Our hope is that it'll be either immediate or in the coming months, even if there are some pieces that they need to sort of work out or flesh out a little bit more. But that is where what we're hoping, right? We truly won't know until we see the language, which is where that sort of rapid response analysis will, I think, come in handy for folks.
Thank you, Chelsea. And that summarizes our Q&A. Thank you to everyone for such great questions. We're going to go ahead and move on to some call to actions. We have several actions you can take to support this important legislation. We will now drop an interest form in the chat where you can sign up to take several actions with us. Chelsea touched base on a couple of these actions, but just want to share a little more information. The Judiciary Committee will hold a public hearing soon to hear from the community on their support for this bill. It's important to have as many community members as possible either submit written testimony and or testify verbally, whether that's in person at the Legislative Office Building or via Zoom. We will also schedule lobby days at the Capitol where community members can join us to lobby legislators and urge them to support this important piece of legislation. So please take a few minutes to complete the form. We will also include the link to the form in the follow-up email post webinar. Once we have the date and time for the public hearing, we will contact you to share the details and our testimony guide, just like Chelsea had mentioned. So again, please take a few minutes to complete the form, and we'll follow up with the link for those who didn't get to it. So with that said, that concludes the webinar on automated license plate readers. I want to thank Yuri and Amalia for grounding us on what this issue looks like with real life experiences of working families, immigrants, and communities who are already under intense pressure. And thank you to Gus and Chelsea for breaking down what automated license plate readers are, how this technology is being used, and why the lack of guardrails should concern every single one of us. We look forward to organizing with you and passing this bill together. So thank you all for your time, your commitment, and being with us tonight. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.